The deaf billionaire's son sat at table 9, silent, nervous, and signing his order with trembling hands. People stared, then looked away. Some laughed under their breath. Others whispered, "What is he doing?" No one knew he was deaf. No one cared that he was trying. Except Maya Thompson, the only waitress who stepped forward, read his hands, and understood he was signing his order, just a chicken sandwich and water. She didn't know the boy she helped was the son of billionaire Robert Caldwell. And she definitely didn't know that in less than 24 hours, her life would begin to change. But she must navigate the challenges of wealth and power while staying true to herself. Before we continue, I want to speak to you for a moment. If stories like this remind you that kindness still exists, if they make you feel something real in a world that's getting louder and colder, then I'd love to have you here with us. This channel isn't just videos, it's a tiny corner of the internet where good people come together, where we believe in second chances, in hope, and in humanity. And right now, you're early. You're part of the very first people building this family with me. So if you want to grow with us, if you want more stories that touch your heart, go ahead and subscribe. It's free. It supports the channel more than you know. And it tells me that there are still people out there who believe in kindness just as much as I do. If you have subscribed to this channel, I can officially say, welcome to the family. The lunch rush at Capitol Diner, one of Washington's oldest local eateries, hit like a storm. Plates clattered, orders overlapped, and the air was thick with the smells of fried chicken, sizzling bacon, and brewed coffee. Maya moved through the chaos, balancing trays in her hands and a practiced smile on her face. She had been on her feet since sunrise, her apron stained with remnants of the morning rush, her back aching. But she didn't allow herself to falter. Every smile she offered was real, even if exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders. She had learned long ago that people didn't care about fatigue. They only noticed mistakes. A spilled drink, a delayed order, or even a fraction of impatience could earn a harsh word or a scolding look. She couldn't afford either. Not today. Not ever. And then he walked in. The bell above the door chimed, a crisp, familiar sound. Heads turned briefly at the small figure that slipped inside. The boy was 8, maybe slightly younger. His hoodie swallowed most of his frame. Sleeves dangled over his hands, which twisted and twitched nervously as he walked across the floor, not to the counter, but straight to table 9, as if he had already decided his spot. His eyes avoided everyone, darting briefly to the floor, then scanning the room. But it was clear he didn't expect anyone to intervene. He hesitated, tugging at the edges of his sleeves, and then sat down carefully, almost shrinking into the booth. Some diners whispered under their breath. Others snickered quietly. "Is he doing charades?" One woman snorted, nudging her friend. "Use your words like everybody else." A man called from the next table. George flinched. The words struck him like a sudden, sharp gust of cold wind. His tiny shoulders hunched, fingers twisting tighter as though he could fold himself into invisibility. Maya, moving past tables with trays of food, froze. She recognized the subtle language of his hands. Not perfectly, but enough to know he was trying to communicate. The anxious twisting of his fingers, the hesitation, the little shivers running through his body, they were all painfully familiar. Her younger brother had struggled in the same way, partially deaf, trying to make himself understood when the world had no patience. "I have to help him," she thought, stepping closer. She approached table 9 carefully, kneeling beside the booth so she could meet his gaze without towering over him. "Hey," she whispered, soft and steady. "It's okay. Take your time." George's eyes flicked up to hers, wary. The world had not been kind to him, and yet something in Maya's calm presence made him pause. He lifted his hands again, trembling slightly, signing slowly. Maya watched, concentrating, interpreting each motion with care. "Chicken sandwich," she relayed quietly to a nearby waiter. "No pickles. Water. He's deaf. He's not being difficult," she added. The waiter blinked, unsure, but nodded. Maya signed back to George. "You're safe. I understand you." His shoulders eased slightly. He repeated the signs, more deliberate this time. Maya smiled and nodded, confirming her understanding. She stayed by his side until the food arrived, ensuring every piece was exactly as he wanted. George ate quietly, small, careful bites, occasionally glancing at Maya with a flicker of gratitude in his eyes, a silent, weighty, "Thank you for seeing me." And then, without Maya noticing, someone had been watching the entire interaction. Evelyn Harper, George's nanny, had been standing near the entrance, ostensibly waiting but truly observing. She had seen the boy step into the diner, shrink into his table, and struggle to communicate in a world that rarely slowed to notice. She had seen the snickers, the whispers, the callous remarks, and she had seen Maya, the young waitress, move through the chaos, taking a moment to kneel, to translate, to treat George with patience and respect. No sighs of annoyance, no judgment, only care. Evelyn's chest tightened. He's never been treated like this in public before. Never, she thought. Not even once. She watched quietly as George's posture softened, his tiny hands less tense. His eyes followed Maya's movements, lingering briefly, with a mix of curiosity and cautious relief. Evelyn felt something rare tug at her heart. Hope. Meanwhile, the rest of the diner remained oblivious. The noise, the smells, the constant motion, all continued without pause. But in this small corner, Table 9 had shifted. George had been truly seen. Maya had recognized him, not as a strange, silent child or a nuisance, but as a human being deserving of patience, understanding, and dignity. When he finished the last bite of his chicken sandwich and set down the wrapper, he looked up at Maya. His glance lingered, subtle, barely noticeable, yet weighted with sincerity. A silent acknowledgement that someone in this world, even for a brief moment, had understood him. Maya, busy wiping the counter and preparing the next order, did not notice the fleeting nod. She didn't see the emotion in his eyes, nor did she notice the quiet, heavy sigh that escaped him as he stood and adjusted his hoodie. George left the diner, the bell above the door chiming behind him. Maya exhaled shakily, unaware she had been holding her breath, her mind already on the next tray, the next table. Across the diner, Evelyn's gaze lingered. Every detail had been absorbed, the small, nervous movements, the subtle shifts in George's expression, the patient gestures of Maya. Evelyn pressed her hand to her lips. Thoughtful. "Not everyone gets to be seen like this," she whispered. "But maybe, just maybe, she can help him in a way no one else ever could." Maya returned to her station, cleaning and preparing, still unaware that her simple act of kindness had not gone unnoticed. A quiet ripple had begun, an effect that could reach far beyond this diner, far beyond the streets of Washington, and far beyond anyone's expectations. The evening had fallen over Washington, painting the streets in deep shades of amber and gold from the city lights. Inside the Caldwell residence, the atmosphere was quiet but precise, a sharp contrast to the chaotic energy of the Capitol diner. Polished floors reflected crystal chandeliers, and the air smelled faintly of fresh flowers and imported coffee. Evelyn Harper, George's nanny, stood by the grand window, the cityscape stretching beyond her gaze, but her attention was entirely elsewhere. She had been mulling over the events of earlier that day at the diner, the small, quiet act that had, in her eyes, been monumental. No one notices him like that. No one truly sees him, except her. She straightened her posture and took a deep breath. She had made her decision. It was time to tell Robert Caldwell. Robert sat at his mahogany desk, reviewing investment reports with the habitual precision of a man who measured life in numbers and profits. The faint ticking of an antique clock filled the silence of the office. Evelyn stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. "Sir," she said, voice calm but weighted with significance. "Today, at lunch, there was a young woman who helped George, a waitress at Capitol Diner. She saw him, really saw him." Robert didn't look up immediately, his eyes scanning the reports before him. "Saw him?" His tone was neutral, a careful mask hiding curiosity, or perhaps indifference. "Yes, sir," Evelyn said, steady. She noticed he struggles. She understood him, and she didn't judge. Robert's pen paused midair. He studied Evelyn for a long moment, expression unreadable. Normally, small acts like this would be inconsequential, fleeting moments that mattered little in the grand design of wealth and influence. But something about her words, the way Evelyn described George's reaction, made him sit back and consider. He smiled. He relaxed. Someone helped him without being asked, without expecting anything in return. For a man accustomed to control, power, and the predictable routines of a privileged life, the unpredictability of human kindness was fascinating. "Where did this happen?" Robert asked finally, voice softer than usual, tinged with a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. "Capitol Diner, sir," Evelyn replied. "I watched discreetly from across the room. She didn't even know I was there. And yet, the effect she had, it was remarkable." Robert leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. He considered the image Evelyn had painted the nervous boy, his hands trembling, his face tense. The warm, steady patience of the waitress who had treated him like a human being instead of a problem to manage. And then he made a decision. "Arrange something," he said, his tone final. "I want to meet this young woman. She's coming to one of our events. Discreetly. Make it happen." Evelyn nodded, her lips pressed in a thin line, a mixture of excitement and surprise at the sudden turn of events. "Yes, sir. Of course." Meanwhile, across the city, Maya had finished her shift at Capitol Diner. Her apron was stained, her feet sore, and her mind already racing through the night's preparations for tomorrow. She didn't think about the boy from Table 9 again, not yet. To her, it had been a small moment, a fleeting interaction. She had helped someone in need. That was her job. That was all. She didn't know that Evelyn Harper had already taken note of her, that the most powerful family in the city was aware of her existence, or that Robert Caldwell had personally decided to involve her in their private affairs. The next morning, Maya arrived at work, still tired, still balancing trays and orders, still forcing smiles onto her weary face. Customers complained about everything: temperature of their coffee, the way their fries were salted, the speed of service. The chaos was relentless, but Maya moved through it with practiced efficiency. She had no idea that her life was about to intersect with a world she had never imagined. Back at the Caldwell estate, Robert sat in his private study, reviewing the guest list for a discreet family gathering. Evelyn had provided a description of Maya: young, hardworking, patient, kind. Someone who had, with nothing more than simple understanding, touched the life of his son. Robert scribbled a note: invite her. Quietly. Test her heart. See if she belongs. It was subtle, strategic, but, in his mind, it was already clear. This small act of kindness had consequences that stretched far beyond a chicken sandwich and a simple lunch. Without Maya knowing, she had already been placed on the guest list for a private family event at the Caldwell estate. A world of wealth, power, and influence far removed from her life. In just a few days, she would step into a reality she could never have imagined. And in that private moment of planning, Robert felt something rare. A cautious anticipation. A curiosity that only genuine kindness could provoke in someone so accustomed to control. Sometimes we see the good others do and take it for granted. If you've ever witnessed someone's small act of kindness and felt its power, subscribing is a way to honor that moment, to never let it go unnoticed. As the day passed, George returned home, chattering quietly about his small victories, yet clinging to the memory of the woman who had made him feel safe. Evelyn smiled knowingly, watching him relax into the warmth of their home. And somewhere in the city, Maya wiped down a counter, unaware that the simple act of seeing a child had already set in motion a story that would change everything for George, for herself, and for a family that rarely allowed anyone to touch their carefully curated world. The quiet ripple had begun. Maya's phone buzzed quietly in the early afternoon. She wiped her hands on her apron, expecting a message from the diner's manager or a reminder for her next shift. Instead, her eyes fell on a sleek, unfamiliar email address, invitations@caldwellstate.com. Her brow furrowed. What is this? A scam? The subject line was simple, almost stark. An invitation for Maya, a private gathering at the Caldwell estate. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the email. The words inside were formal, elegant, and clear. Miss Thompson, your kindness toward our son has not gone unnoticed. You are cordially invited to join us at the Caldwell estate this Friday afternoon. Please arrive promptly at 3 p.m. Dress smartly and kindly, RSVP. Maya blinked. Her heart skipped a beat. Our son? Who? Her mind immediately jumped to the boy from the diner. The little boy at table 9, the one who had struggled to order and looked like the world had never made room for him. Curiosity won. The following Friday, Maya stepped out of her modest sedan and walked up the long, winding driveway of the Caldwell estate. The massive gates swung open as though expecting her. Her chest tightened with awe and nerves. The floor reflected the afternoon sun. Crystal chandeliers hung from impossibly high ceilings, and staff moved silently, unobtrusively, like shadows gliding along the walls. And then she saw him, the boy. 8 years old. Hesitant. Shy. Yet his eyes lit up when they landed on her. Hi, Maya said softly, crouching slightly to meet his gaze. He gave her a small, tentative smile. You remember me? He signed nervously. Of course, Maya whispered, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Then, hesitation struck her. Wait. What's your name? She asked, realizing she had never learned it at the diner. The boy's fingers twisted for a moment, then he signed, George. George. Maya repeated it softly, letting the name settle. George. Before she could say more, a tall man approached, exuding quiet authority. His posture was impeccable, his expression unreadable, but there was a subtle intensity in his gaze that made Maya instinctively straighten. Miss Thompson, he said, voice calm but commanding, I'm Robert Caldwell. Thank you for coming. Maya's mouth opened, but she hesitated. Something in his presence made words difficult. She smiled politely. Robert studied her carefully, scanning her simple outfit and noticing the faint calluses on her hands. And yet, he assumed naturally, instinctively, that she was some professional, a tutor, or child specialist, someone carefully recommended to help George. You've done remarkable work with him, Robert continued, warm but formal. I can already see how much he responds to your guidance. Maya froze slightly, heart sinking. He thinks I'm a tutor? Thank you, sir, she stammered. I'm just a waitress. I just helped him order lunch. Robert smiled, not noticing her discomfort. Of course. We value anyone who can positively influence our son. Come. Let me show you around. George is eager to show you the garden. George tugged gently at her hand, pulling her toward the massive windows overlooking the estate gardens. Flowers bloomed in perfect symmetry, fountains sparkled in the sun, and the air smelled faintly of roses and fresh grass. George's small, nervous fingers brushed hers, as if seeking reassurance. You remembered me, he signed again, eyes flicking up to hers. Maya bent slightly, her voice gentle. Of course, George. How could I forget? Robert observed silently from the doorway, still unaware of Maya's true background. The richer the world around her, the more vulnerable she felt, and yet George's quiet trust made it almost unbearable to play the part of someone she wasn't. The plot twist was subtle but potent. She had not yet revealed her true background. The awe, the fear, the tension all were heightened because she had never expected this. She was a simple diner waitress who had stumbled into a world of wealth and power, a world that assumed she was something she wasn't. By the time the afternoon ended, George clung quietly to her arm as they walked through the gardens. Maya's heart ached and soared at the same time. She had entered a world she never imagined. And her life, her choices, her kindness had suddenly become far more powerful than she could have ever known. The Caldwell estate was a labyrinth of elegance. The polished floors stretched endlessly. Polished wood gleamed under chandeliers, and the scent of fresh flowers lingered in every corridor. Maya walked quietly behind George as he guided her toward a small study, a room bathed in sunlight and lined with bookshelves taller than her head. "Here," George signed, pointing to a chair by the window. His small hands trembled slightly, a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Maya knelt beside him, letting him settle before opening her notebook. Today was the first real tutoring session. George had been quiet at the diner, shy and reserved. But here in his own environment, Maya could see glimpses of something extraordinary. He was intelligent, creative, and incredibly perceptive. He struggled with words and emotional expression. But every sign, every gesture, carried meaning. Maya was patient, translating, guiding, and gently encouraging him to explore ideas and articulate thoughts beyond the limitations of his silence. Yet the moment was not without pressure. Around them, the estate hummed with quiet observation. Staff moved silently through the corridors, their eyes flicking toward Maya in judgment. Were her clothes modest enough? Her posture poised enough? Did she belong here? In this world of polished perfection and unspoken rules, Maya felt the weight of it. She was just a diner waitress, suddenly thrust into a world that measured her worth by appearances and etiquette. Humility wrestled with confidence in her chest. She forced herself to focus on George, on the connection that mattered most. The whispers of the wealthy world could not touch this corner of sunlight. Not while she had her purpose. Hours passed. George scribbled in his notebook, signed questions, and occasionally laughed softly at a joke only they shared. Maya's chest lifted with pride. He was thriving, even in small, quiet ways. Then it happened. George looked up at her, eyes wide, and began signing something she wasn't expecting. His fingers moved quickly, but deliberately. Maya leaned in, heart catching in her throat as she interpreted the message. "I told Daddy, you are my favorite person." Maya froze. Her hand hovered over his, a warm tingle spreading through her chest. She could feel the weight of the words, the silent gratitude, the trust of a child who had already seen more indifference than understanding in his young life. From the doorway, Robert Caldwell watched silently. His expression was unreadable, but inside, something shifted. He had orchestrated this private gathering, arranged the tutoring, and yet he had never expected to witness such raw, genuine emotion. Maya had done more than teach George letters, words, and numbers. She had touched his heart. The tension in the room was thick but invisible. Maya's eyes met George's, and she smiled softly. A mixture of humility and joy. "I'm honored, George," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the quiet hum of the estate. Robert remained at the doorway, unseen by Maya and George. For the first time, he considered the invisible weight of influence, the subtle power of kindness, patience, and understanding. He realized that wealth, status, and control could not replicate what Maya had given George. Genuine care, and in that silent observation, he felt a rare pang of guilt. How often had his world overlooked the quiet, unnoticed acts that truly mattered? How many people had passed through their lives, touching it gently, and yet remained unrecognized? When someone believes in us, even in silence, it can change everything. If this story makes you pause and reflect on who's quietly supporting you in your life, subscribing is a promise to notice and honor those who lift others up. Maya's chest tightened as George signed a few more words, asking her to help him with a story. He wanted to write a story about a brave little boy who learned to speak through the heart rather than the voice. She smiled again, taking his small hands in hers for a moment, knowing this bond was already reshaping both their lives. Outside the study, Robert retreated silently, closing the door with quiet deliberation. He had underestimated the power of one ordinary young woman in a world that valued perfection, control, and influence above all else. The day ended with George proudly showing Maya his story, pages filled with crooked letters, colorful sketches, and the unmistakable signature of his own creativity. Maya's heart swelled. This was no ordinary tutoring session. This was a crossing of worlds, one of privilege and power, and one of humility, hard work, and quiet courage. And somehow, against all odds, they had found a way to meet in the middle. The ripple had grown stronger. What started as a simple act of kindness at a diner had now begun to shift lives in ways neither Maya nor George could yet comprehend. Despite the polished elegance of the Caldwell estate, Maya was beginning to notice the shadows beneath the surface. What had once felt like a magical, welcoming world now carried an undercurrent of control, subtle, quiet, yet unmistakably powerful. Maya had grown accustomed to the grandeur, the chandeliers, marble floors, the quiet efficiency of staff. But lately, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, assessed. She noticed cameras in corners that weren't there yesterday, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when she walked by, and fleeting glances from staff whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. Her stomach tightened with unease. Something was happening, and she didn't yet know what. Meanwhile, Robert Caldwell observed her from a distance. He was impressed by her patience, her kindness, and the way George responded to her. But there was also suspicion gnawing at him. Could she be trusted? Was she truly there for George, or did some ulterior motive guide her actions? He had learned long ago that appearances were deceptive, and the world didn't reward naivety. Maya spent the afternoon tutoring George in the sunlit study. She showed him how to string words into stories, to draw emotions into pictures, to sign ideas that had never found voice. George laughed quietly, the kind of soft, unrestrained laughter Maya rarely heard in the diner. For a moment, she allowed herself to forget the tension around her. Then she made a mistake. While fetching a pencil from the side table, she overheard two staff members whispering behind a slightly ajar door. Their voices were low, hurried, but their words reached her unmistakably. "We need to make sure he doesn't wander too far. Normal experiences. Dangerous." Maya froze. The pencil slipped from her fingers, clattering softly to the floor. She ducked behind the desk, heart pounding. They continued, unaware of her presence. "He can't be exposed to outsiders. It's for his protection. The family will control everything." Control. Isolation. Fear. Words that turned her chest cold. She had assumed the Caldwell world was just a wealthy, structured life. But this was manipulation. The possibility of a childhood constrained by power and privilege, rather than love and freedom, filled her with a protective fury. When she returned to George, he was scribbling furiously in his notebook, oblivious to the tension that had just crashed into her awareness. Maya's hands trembled as she sat down beside him. She couldn't show fear, not to him, but she made a silent vow. "If anyone tries to cage this boy in a gilded prison, I'll be there to fight for him, in any way I can." That night, as she walked back to her small apartment, the streets of Washington felt heavier. The city lights, once warm, now seemed distant, almost indifferent. She had entered a world of wealth and influence, yes, but it came with its own dangers. Power that could suffocate innocence. Privilege that could manipulate freedom. The stakes had changed. Maya's role was no longer just tutoring a bright, shy child. She had become, unwittingly, a guardian of George's emotional world. Every word she translated, every story she encouraged, was now a small act of resistance against an unseen force threatening to control him. And somewhere in the estate, Robert Caldwell observed her again, thoughtful and calculating. He noticed her tension, her attentiveness, and perhaps even her fear. He didn't yet know that she had overheard the conversation, but he would sense the subtle shift in her demeanor. The plot twist hit hard. Maya now realized that her kindness and patience weren't just nurturing George. They could become a shield, a line of defense against forces that might try to confine him. And she didn't yet know who she could trust, or which motives were pure. The audience is left suspended on the edge of moral tension. The diner waitress who helped a boy now faces the possibility of protecting him from a gilded cage. Every glance, every gesture, every act of care has suddenly become high stakes. The ripple of her actions, once small and invisible, had begun to challenge a world built on secrecy, wealth, and control. The Caldwell estate was quiet that evening, the hum of distant staff activity barely reaching the study where Maya sat with George. The golden sunlight had faded into soft shadows, and the air carried the faint scent of roses mixed with polished wood. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she looked at George, who sat cross-legged on the floor, his notebook and pencils scattered around him. The boy's eyes, so often quiet and hesitant, held a weight of trust and expectation that pressed heavily on her heart. She knew the truth now. Wealth, power, and influence surrounded them. But behind the polished surfaces lurked danger for George. A subtle, invisible attempt to restrict his world and cage his innocence. Maya's mind raced. She could continue working quietly, tutoring and guiding him within the walls of the estate, playing the role Robert and his family expected. Or she could stand up, not just as a tutor, not just as a visitor, but as someone willing to protect this child from being trapped by privilege, masquerading as care. Her thoughts were interrupted when George slid something across the floor toward her. Maya picked it up carefully. It was a drawing, simple and childlike, yet impossibly heavy with emotion. It was the diner. George's tiny hands had recreated the scene where she had helped him order, translating the chaos and isolation of that moment into colored pencils and crayons. Attached was a small note, written in his careful print. "You saw me when no one else did." Maya felt a lump rise in her throat. Her hands shook as she pressed the drawing to her chest. And for a moment, the world outside the wealth, the whispers, the surveillance seemed to vanish. All that mattered was this boy who had trusted her, who had quietly revealed his heart and his gratitude. A shadow fell across the room. Maya looked up to see Robert Caldwell standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, yet not unkind. "You've seen what matters," he said quietly, voice calm, deliberate. "And you've acted. That's rare." Maya froze, unsure how to respond. Robert stepped fully into the room. "You see, Maya, all of this," he gestured broadly to the estate, to the grandeur surrounding them, "was never meant to intimidate George. Nor was it meant to test me. It was meant to test you." Maya's eyes widened. "Test me?" Robert nodded. "Your kindness at the diner, the way you saw a child when no one else did, wasn't just noticed. It was quietly evaluated. I needed to know if someone could positively influence him without being swayed by wealth, status, or appearances. And you passed that test with every gesture, every patient moment, every word of encouragement." Maya's chest tightened. Shock, disbelief, relief, they all collided. Every nervous glance, every quiet act of patience, every hesitant word she had spoken to George had mattered far more than she had imagined. Her gaze returned to George. The boy smiled faintly, fingers twisting nervously in his lap, but the look in his eyes said it all. "You mattered. You made a difference." Maya realized then that this choice, continuing to act with kindness, even when unnoticed, even when the world seemed indifferent, was what defined her. She didn't need wealth, approval, or status. She needed courage, heart, and the willingness to stand for what was right. She knelt beside George, brushing a strand of hair behind his ear. "We'll make sure your world stays yours," she whispered, a promise that resonated far deeper than the opulent walls around them. Robert remained in the doorway, silent now, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The boy's trust, her integrity, and the simple act that had started it all, the chicken sandwich at the diner, had proven more valuable than any wealth he possessed. Some choices define us long after the moment has passed. if this story makes you think about the moments when your kindness mattered more than you realized. Maya looked back at George's drawing one last time before placing it gently on the desk. She took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. In a world where power often suffocated innocence, one small act of recognition, one willingness to see, could change everything. And in that quiet study, with shadows of sunlight and marble around them, Maya realized she had changed not just George's world, but her own. What will you rate this story from 0 to 10? And what part of the world are you watching from? Comment your country below. Let's build a global community rooted in kindness and second chances. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your friends. Your support brings us closer to our 1K subscriber milestone and inspires us to keep creating more emotional stories of resilience, healing, and Black excellence. Thank you for being part of our journey. Your presence matters more than you know. Hope to see you again.